At Betham, we recognize the complexity and the diversity of views and opinions relating to Israel. And so it's important here, now more than ever, to inform ourselves and learn from leaders in the conversation, like our guest speaker tonight, Ahmed, Fouad, Alkhatib. Throughout the year, we try to bring in and engage with multiple points of view, even if we don't always see eye to eye. After all, one of the goals is that we continue to engage with and wrestle with Israel. It is, after all, in our name. We are Am Yisrael, a people who wrestle with God and who recognize that anything of true substance and importance isn't simple, but requires engagement, grappling, and wrestling. And it's important to note that we are also a synagogue, a spiritual community made up of individuals that approach every facet of Jewish life and belief in myriad different ways, including Israel. We are not homogeneous in our thinking about anything, but this is a place where we come together to be in relationship, to engage with one another, even if we might disagree with each other on certain issues, and where we gather to learn and pray and celebrate and mourn together as well. This is a place where we strive to see the best in each other and lift each other up, even if we don't always see eye to eye. Throughout the last year, we have worked hard to acknowledge and hold on to the humanity of the Palestinian and now Lebanese people, to not lose sight of or become numb to their suffering and our shared humanity, along with that of our Jewish brothers and sisters in Israel. And of course, we continue to pray for peace and for the safe return of the hostages still in Hamas captivity. Tonight I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker. Ahmed Fouad Alkhatib is an American writer and analyst who grew up in Gaza City, having left in 2005 as a teenage exchange student to the United States. He writes extensively on Gaza's political and humanitarian affairs and has been an outspoken critic of Hamas and a promoter of coexistence and peace as the only path forward between Palestinians and Israelis. Alkhatib is a resident senior fellow with the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative at the Atlantic Council's Middle East programs. He's got a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's in intelligence and national security studies. His writing and his social media posts are found widely. His writing has been published in the United States and Israeli outlets, and his opinions and comments have been featured in the international press. Ahmed is in town this weekend, in part to speak here tonight, but also to participate in the JCC's Z3 conference on Sunday, and we're honored to have him as our guest tonight. He'll be speaking on, the title of his talk is A Gazan American's Perspective of the War and Hamas. I also want to note that Ahmed will be staying after our service tonight for a Q&A in the social hall, so we hope you'll join us for that as well. There'll be snacks, if that's any incentive to come. Mostly Ahmed will be there, and I'm sure it'll be wonderful to hear more from him after our service as well. So Ahmed, welcome to Congregation Betham. Welcome to our Bima.
Thanks so much for having me here. Hello, good evening. My name is Ahmed. I just landed a couple hours ago, and I live in DC, so forgive me if my voice gives out a little bit. And I struggled to think of what can I squeeze in 15 minutes. I am somebody who's not known for brevity, for better or for worse. I don't consider myself a professional talker or a professional peace activist or a professional, there's very much so something about this that is motivated from the heart and comes from the heart as not just an academic or an intellectual or a political issue, but one that impacts me personally and directly and has since my childhood. So I'll quickly share. So my challenge to myself was to both be as brief as one could be in 15 minutes, but also really not do written remarks so that I can look at you, so that you can feel and trust that there is that connection, that this is not an exercise in professional talkism, which exists, unfortunately, particularly in the DC world, where I just moved. So I lived in Pacifica here in the Bay Area. I went from Gaza to the San Francisco Bay Area, and just 2 months ago, I drove myself across country and started my DC swamp life. And I'm really delighted to be back home. So real quickly about myself. So I grew up in Gaza up until 2005. I was 15 at the time, and I left 1 month before the withdrawal of Israeli settlements. And I came to the United States, to the Bay Area, as a junior in high school. I'm 34 right now. I feel like I'm 64 in a 34-year-old body, for better or for worse. But I came here, it was a 1-year-long exchange program, attend an American high school. It was a post-9/11 initiative to build cultural bridges between the Arab and Muslim world and the United States. And so I completed my year here at Terranova High School in Pacifica. I attempted to go back to Gaza in 2006 in June. Now, while I was in the United States, Hamas had taken formal power, if you will, through the infamous 2006 elections, and there was a slow brewing civil war between themselves and Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, if you will. And so I was in Egypt, about to cross in through the Rafah border crossing, and unfortunately Hamas abducted Gilad Shalit at the time, a young Israeli soldier. That was soon followed by the 2006 Lebanon war, the 33-day war between Hezbollah and Israel. So I was stuck in Egypt, unable to go back into Gaza for 3 months. And thanks to the support of human rights and peace activists in the San Francisco Bay Area, I was able to come back here and pursue my senior year of high school while also applying for political asylum status. The program that I participated in had become, let's just say, initially it was a novelty in a Palestinian context at the time. And so it received a lot of negative attention from Hamas and from some of the more Salafist type Islamist organizations. And the very day of my political asylum interview here in the United States was June 14th, 2007, which is the very day that Hamas took over the Gaza Strip and ejected the Palestinian Authority. And I ultimately received asylum. I became a citizen in 2014, 10 years ago. And my immediate and extended family, the majority of them remained in Gaza while I was here in the United States. None of them had come over here. My dad was a physician for UNRWA. He ran the UNRWA clinic in Jabalia. He passed away 4 years ago, and in fact, while he was going through his advanced stage lung cancer, I had mobilized a lot of my Israeli friends and allies in the land to help get him to the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Those folks that you hear about in the Gaza kibbutzim that helped Palestinian patients, that's not just some random talking point. That was literally my father, whose life was extended essentially by a year. And then when the closures happened around COVID, he no longer could access the medication and go to the Hebrew University, and he died within 3 weeks. My middle brother was also a director of an UNRWA clinic in the beach camp. So that's all, we're talking northern Gaza. I grew up in northern Gaza. My oldest brother right now, as we speak, he's in Gaza. He runs a major British medical NGO, working with the likes of Doctors Without Borders, International Rescue Committee, all the major organizations are pooling their resources together. When and finally, real quickly, I, for the last 8 years, 8.5 years, I will say, I've been working in international development in Africa, somewhat removed from Israel and Palestine, but I would veer in and out of the issue. In 2015, I launched an organization to create an internationally run, Israeli-approved airport in the Gaza Strip, one that would facilitate the movement of people and cargo, in a way that would allow Gaza to have a non-Israeli and a non-Egyptian entry and exit point. And so that entailed, and I have long believed in pragmatism, And so that entailed talking to the Israelis, talking to the IDF. I got to some of the most senior folks in there, but I also talked to Hamas through intermediaries. I talked to Sinwar personally in 2017, and I published a piece soon after he was killed a month ago in Newsweek detailing my conversations with Sinwar. And I had long been, in my initial years being in the United States, I was both involved in what you would call your typical pro-Palestine activism. And so whether we're talking BDS, Students for Justice in Palestine, that whole set of activism. But I was also in parallel, and sometimes to the disapproval, if you will, of some of my peers and colleagues, involved in a lot of, in different Jewish, Israeli, and Palestinian dialogue groups. And there were tiers of that. There were, definitely your stereotypical kumbaya, let's eat falafels and hummus and everything's gonna be fine. I love falafel and hummus. I'd love to share my falafel and hummus with y'all. But that was, I would say, the most kind of rudimentary tier of it. And then there were some groups that went up and up in terms of how far that dialogue went. Are we trying to establish common ground? Are we trying to establish kind of like what ticks us off? Are we trying to force ourselves to be uncomfortable with each other's unique individuality, unique lived experiences? And as time went on, I did have, and I'm just going through this real briefly, a falling out with a lot of what you would call the typical pro-Palestine activist organizations, not because I became less pro-Palestine. In fact, that's how my Twitter bio, I want to reclaim what it means to be pro-Palestine, but I have grown frustrated with what I have felt was the radicalization, if you will, of the rhetoric, of the ethos of a lot of folks who speak over Palestinians, speak on behalf of Palestinians. And that doesn't make me, unfortunately, it's the polarization, generally speaking, but certainly since the October 7 massacre, has been such that everything is very black and white, up or down, oppressed, oppressor, occupied, occupier, and there's very little space for gray, for color, for details, for nuance. Now, I certainly, am I speaking too loud? Am I bothered? Is the mic too loud for you? Sorry, I'll back up a little. Okay, so basically what I've been trying to do since October 7 is to make a case that there's a lot more to being pro-Palestine than simply being anti-Israel, and that there's a lot more that can be done by engaging different threads of the Jewish community than simply relying on the majority of the Jewish community moving to a place where they're anti-Zionist, where they don't believe in Israel, where you have to basically accept that Israel is here to stay and that we as pro-Palestine folks have a responsibility to be good custodians of this cause, particularly in the Western diaspora and in the Western world. So the first Trump administration coming into power frustrated a lot of my airport work. I had made a lot of progress. I was, Hillary Clinton was in Gaza in '98, opening an airport, a short-lived airport. I actually flew into Gaza's short-lived airport in '99 and in 2000. And so I moved away from Israel and Palestine and focused on my work in philanthropy in Africa. And then October 7 happened. And when I obtained my master's in intelligence and national security, I had every intention of working in international relations, and I had a job at the State Department, and I even received my top secret clearance and was the first Gazan American to ever get a top secret clearance from the US government. But when October 7 happened, I'd been tracking different threads that concerned me before the attack. Hamas was going to do something stupid that would have deadly consequences for our people. Chief among them is the prospect of Saudi-Israeli normalization. The Qataris in June of 2023, last year, threatened to cut off funding for Hamas. sending them into a frenzied search. And we now know that in September of that year, Mr. Netanyahu sent David Barnea, the head of Mossad, to Qatar, to Doha, and said, you keep the funding going to Hamas 1 month before the massacre. And this is not hyperbole, this is not my own opinion, this is well documented, well understood among international political circles, intelligence circles, that, you know, there is this marriage of convenience. There is a nefarious 3D game chess that enabled Hamas's rule to be entrenched in Gaza, enabled them to be a tool, if you will, in propagating division between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, where the Palestinian Authority was. As imperfect and as corrupt and as problematic the Palestinian Authority was, and I dealt with a lot of them, all the way to Mr. Abu Mazen, the president, and a lot of the folks in his periphery. They consistently have coordinated with Israel to stop hundreds of terror attacks. They were willing to do whatever it took to not only prevent Hamas from taking over the Gaza Strip, the West Bank rather, like they did in the Gaza Strip, but from being viable partners in pursuing some kind of a negotiated settlement that results in a two-state solution. And so Hamas, for me, what makes them particularly nefarious, and I identify as somebody who is pro-Palestine, anti-Hamas, anti-occupation, pro-peace and coexistence, I mean, it has been immensely surprising what has happened since October 7th, that the legitimacy, the amount of legitimacy that Hamas has gained at a time when people in Gaza en masse have been turning against the terror group for gambling their lives away, for squandering their resources, for dragging them into this suicidal adventure on behalf of the Islamic Republic of Iran, for building, you know, the Gaza Metro, hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, while failing to build a single bomb shelter and saying, oh, well, it's not our job to take care of our people. UNRWA and the international community needs to take care of our people. I mean, that has been so exposed to the people of Gaza. And I want to just quickly go through, like, what was horrifying for me after October 7 happened is that before the attack, it was the norm for a lot of folks in my community, the Arab Muslim Palestinian community, to say, well, I don't really like Hamas, I'm not a fan, but Israel's occupation. Well, I'm not really a fan of Hamas, but the blockade. And then unfortunately, something happened after perhaps it was some folks, and I'm not saying all, I want to be clear about that, but a significant segment were mesmerized perhaps by the success of the attack, at least the initial success, that the script completely just collapsed. It was like, no, actually, Hamas is wonderful. I love Hamas. Hamas is resistance. We need to support them. Like, this is a good idea. This is how we deal with the Zionists. And I was genuinely horrified by the glorification of the group, the glorification of the hostage-taken women and children. I was embarrassed and ashamed that my beautiful people, my beautiful Gaza, my amazing folks that I grew up with would be associated with something as horrendous and as inhumane as what we saw on October 7th. I was also horribly offended by this notion that everybody in Gaza supported Hamas. Everybody in Gaza somehow endorsed the attack, and just because we saw a few thousand civilians both go into Israel following the first and second waves of Hamas, or abuse the hostages and the bodies of dead Israelis, both of which were incredibly shameful, that somehow means 2.3 million people are implicated directly in this. The fact of the matter is that half of the Gaza Strip, even before October 7, have been vehemently opposed to Hamas ideologically by the simple math of half of Gaza is Fatah, the Palestinian Authority affiliated party. And they are ideologically and politically opposed to Hamas, to Islamism, to the armed resistance narrative, because they have endorsed the two-state solution and nonviolence. You also have people who, I mean, Hamas was a one-party rule. And so if you needed a job, if you wanted to be a civil servant, if you wanted to have a part in, you know, an economy that had 30% unemployment, 70% youth unemployment, 75% of Gaza's population became aid dependent, there's a lot to be said about how Hamas has been so exceptionally destructive of the Palestinian people's just and urgent aspirations for liberation, for freedom, for statehood and independence. And I have been on a mission to not only delegitimize Hamas, to not only speak out against them, to not only expose their crime, their torture, but to say that, to make the case legally, morally, politically, economically, and otherwise, and geostrategically, that you cannot be pro-Palestine without condemning Hamas. You cannot be, and not just condemning them as in, I condemn Hamas, but with all that that entails of separating the Palestinian people from Hamas, acknowledging that Israel is here, Israel has a right to exist. That latter point is difficult for some people because they feel that they are being asked to acknowledge Israel's right to exist at a time when many in Israel do not reciprocate that. I have been trying to challenge that we have partners in the Jewish and Israeli community whom, if really given a chance to be viable allies, and we engage in them, and we get out of this entrenched binary of pro-Palestine or pro-Israel, and there's nothing in between, and anybody from the Palestinian side that challenges this binary entrenched narrative, you're a Zionist, you're a sellout, you're a spy, you're a shill, which is something that you better believe I hear all the time. And to show that peace, coexistence, even if we end up in a situation where I believe the Israelis and Palestinians need to have separation, but there's different modalities for what peace and coexistence looks like. Again, it doesn't mean the Palestinians start loving Israelis or Jews all of a sudden. It could take generations to get to that place, but we start with separation and we rebrand peace and coexistence as a courageous evolution that is necessary to preserve the Palestinian people on what remains of their land, that is necessary to build a nation, not just a state, but a nation. What kind of a state do we want to have? What kind of a people do we want to have? Do we want to be governed by Islamists who are affiliated with the Islamic Republic? Do we want a democratic state? Do we want a nation that acknowledges the rights of minorities and women? Or do we simply want to have a state to say we have a state and then have a scenario where, just like South Sudan, which became independent in 2011, 2013, 2 years, total civil war and the squandering of resources. So I have been on a mission to do that, and being here, speaking out against Hamas, but also I didn't get a chance to say much about, I have also spoken out vehemently against Prime Minister Netanyahu, against the Israeli government, against the IDF's actions and conduct of the war in Gaza, which has entailed, one of the things that I have not shared thus far is that unfortunately I lost 31 of my immediate and extended family members. I knew when October 7 happened that this would be a disaster of epic proportions for the people of Gaza, and that my family, like everybody else, would not be spared the disaster that was going to befall the entirety of the population. And so 3 separate Israeli airstrikes on October 13th, October 25th, and December 14th killed all of these family members and destroyed the 2 childhood homes where I had grown up. Something like 14 children under the age of 9, babies as young as 3 and 4 months old, shredded. And to this day, I have no idea. The New York Times did an investigation into why the IDF struck my family's homes. The Amnesty International, Foreign Policy has done an investigation and reached out to the IDF. And there's not a single explanation for why these 3 airstrikes have taken place. It could have been AI enabled, it could have been a mistake, it could have been faulty intelligence, but I have to live with that for the rest of my life. My family, who are not Hamas, who are not involved in terrorism, who had nothing to do with hostage taking, like tens of thousands of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip paying the ultimate price. And I've said, even though I've stayed away from the legal fight of, is this a genocide, is this not? And I get attacked all the time because I don't say it's either or. I have said this is a war crime. Just like Hamas committed war crimes on October 7 that they should be held accountable for, the Israeli government and the Israeli military have also committed war crimes that I will absolutely demand accountability for. But both things don't have to be mutually exclusive. Both things can be true at the same time. Just like, for example, I have also connected with Israeli hostage families on multiple occasions, and that's how I met my colleague Melanie, who's with me here, and is that the Israeli hostage families, for me personally, have not only emerged to be some of my most steadfast allies in terms of my connection with them being an opportunity to humanize each other and to connect around our suffering, connect around our loss. But they are the ones that are pushing for an end of this war through a deal, through a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal that we know 69% of the Israeli public and electorate support in poll after poll after poll. And again, I get attacked all the time by the pro-Palestine community of how dare you work with Israeli hostage families and call yourself a Palestinian Muslim Arab? How dare you, stand with the father of an IDF soldier who was captured, and my dear friend and ally Yehuda Cohen. So my challenge to you, to just close in 30 seconds, and I'm sorry I went over time, is to resist the binary temptation to think of Gaza as Hamas or not Hamas, to resist the temptation to think that somehow the Palestinian people are monolithic. We are not. This is what I'm trying to do. I speak for myself and on my own behalf. I've never once claimed, and you'll never hear me say, I represent the Palestinian blah, 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 blah. And I take liberty and freedom in operating solo because it allows me to really break through a lot of the walls and the forbidden narratives, and you can't veer here and here. However, what I say, different bits and pieces of my beliefs and thoughts and views are absolutely held by a large number of Palestinians. Doesn't mean they're going to go and talk to Yehuda Cohen tomorrow and work with Israeli hostage families. It doesn't mean they're going to be Zionists. And guess what? We don't need Palestinians to become Zionists. That's not the point. But they very much so believe in the inevitability of peace and coexistence. They believe that the armed resistance narrative has failed us time and again. They believe that we have been pawns in numerous geopolitical projects, going back to the pan-Arabism of Nasser in the 50s and 60s, the PLO's secularism, the PFLP's communism and Marxism, and the 60s and 70s, and now Hamas's Islamism. Different ideologies, same damaging, destructive outcome. More loss of land, more deaths, more delegitimization, and the world is moving on, and the Arab world is not what it once was. This issue, this is our last chance, and I view the Saudi-Israeli normalization, and I'm in DC, and I got my ears down, and I'm listening. This could very well be our last hope for Israel's regional integration, for isolating Iran, and not the Iranian people, whom I love dearly and sincerely, but the Islamic regime in there. But we can't just wait for a parachuted agreement to come in. It does take every single one of us. And I'm not asking you to fundamentally change how you view Israel and Palestine. I'm simply asking you to allow for more space for Palestinian suffering, for the fact that the Palestinian people are diverse, for the fact that there are many Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians who are desperate for something else, something different, but a combination of the lack of leadership, a combination of fear. I get threats all the time. I have to walk around with guns all the time, unfortunately, and wear body armor because of the very detailed threats. It's risky, it's dangerous, it's tough to put yourself out there, but it is my hope and goal that I want to normalize Palestinians saying what I'm saying. I want to pave the path for the next 1,000 Ahmeds who are there, who exist in bits and pieces around the world. And you, my Jewish and Israeli friends and allies and brothers and sisters, can play a role in having that. Sometimes less is better, sometimes listening, sometimes just agreeing to disagree, being a little bit uncomfortable. I want to set up a program, for example, in DC to help young Palestinian and Arab activists just on how to speak to, even how to engage respectfully and disagree. So thank you for having me here. Thank you for giving me the space, and I look forward to the Q&A afterwards.
Ahmed, thank you so much for your insights, for your spirit as well, and truly for a message of hope, I think, for all of us to hold on to and think about. We'll continue our service on page 200.